late. I was having some difficulty.
That's okay. I see Sarah on the line. I hope everybody's online, but by way of introduction, Sarah McGee with GovHR is our executive recruiter assisting with the Director of Development candidate source. She provided a candidate resume package that you should all have a copy of now in your mailbox, hopefully in your hand. And she's going to spend a few minutes reviewing the methodology for how they recruited candidates and selected the top 7 and then the tier 2 5. So Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Hey, Sarah. How are you? Let's just see who's on the line. I am Paige Bibby, the City Council President. It's nice to meet you. Mr. Kirby is here with me.
Here.
Charles, would you like this? Charles Kirby.
Here.
Yes. Christy, are you there?
Yes, present.
That would be Christy Hill. Mr. Art, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Somebody needs to mute.
Sarah, Mr. Art is there. Mr. Jackson? Okay, Mr. Jackson's not with us. Who else is on the line?
This is Herman.
Hi, Herman, how are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Hope y'all
Great.
well.
Is that all?
I'm watching y'all on YouTube.
Okay, well, we'll just give you a wave, Herman. All right, Sarah, go ahead. Again, nice to meet you. I'm sorry?
It's Tab.
Oh, Tab, how are you, Mayor? Sarah, that's our mayor, Mr. Bowen. All righty, we're ready, Sarah. Go right ahead.
All right, thank you so much. So, as you see in our cover letter, we were able to get 56 different applicants from obviously around the United States, had several from Alabama, as we mentioned. So we did a national search, advertising primarily on websites that would seek candidates that had experience in planning, for instance, and/or economic development or general management experience. And so we think we had a pretty good turnout. I was really impressed with the list of candidates that we were able to put together. You see in your packet that there were applicants. There were a total of 12 that we that I personally had an interview with, a video interview with, and that we've checked some references on them, and we've done some initial background searches on them. And so those are the ones that we brought forward to you. And so in those 12, you see that we divided those into 2 tiers. And the 2 tiers we talked about are tiers, meaning tier 1 would be candidates that we feel like could walk in and hit the ground running, have a lot of the experiences and skill sets that you were looking for in your candidate. And then tier 2 are candidates that we feel maybe aren't quite ready for this step, or have some other items that maybe they're lacking experience in, but they've got some good experience in other areas. And actually in this case, there is a candidate in tier 2 that the reason he was put there is because his salary request is much higher than what you're willing to pay. And so that is usually another factor that we will put them in tier 2, is that they may be qualified, but they're not willing to accept something lower than what you're advertising it at. So that's kind of where we are. So generally how I start is with just the first candidate. We'll go through the questions that I had for them and the answers or perspectives that I gained from them. And then we have some references that we'll talk about there as well. Any questions before we get started?
Rochelle, who all was involved in determining who these final 12 were?
That was managed by our executive recruiter.
So that was a contractor of ours, essentially.
Miss Henderson and Miss McKee.
Is that what you're telling me? A contractor?
Yes, we defer to their expertise.
Okay.
They have a background in government, executive recruiting, but Sarah specifically, if you would describe your background, Sarah, I think it would be helpful.
Oh, sure. So I have been with our firm's been in business since 1973. It's had a couple of different names, but primarily we've been in business since 1973. We only recruit for municipalities or we may do entities that are associated with municipalities, like councils, governments, or metropolitan planning commissions, those types of things. But we only deal with municipal governments because we're all experienced in that area. I'm a former city manager, a former public works director, and so that is my background. But in addition, I mean, the question asked of who did the initial search, I did the initial search and the initial culling of the candidates. On top of that, once we had narrowed our list individually as a recruiter for our firm, we send that list to all of our recruiters as well to say, hey, is there anybody on this list that you know something about that we should know, whether that's good or bad? And so it's not only me looking at that list, but it is other people in our firm looking at it as well. And so that's, we base that upon the initial information that we received while we were in town visiting and understanding of what you'd like to see in the next development director. So that's what we use.
I'm sorry, and this is Charles Kirby again. So I want to be clear. So you're telling me that nobody within our administration or city has had any opinion or additional input to the selection process?
That is correct.
Thank you.
So any other questions before we get started?
Don't think so,
No,
thank
ma'am.
you.
Okay. So your first candidate is Mr. Jarvis. So he's currently in a situation where he would like to go on to a bigger organization. So Henderson, Vance County is a small area, but it's growing. One of the things that we see in places like Henderson is they're starting to see some economic development, albeit COVID-19 has taken a different approach to that. But he's also had been a director in Virginia as well, and those two are little smaller organizations. And so, but I feel like the things we talked about, his focus on, he's really focused on customer service. He sees his role as being one of collaboration, even though he may have limited resources in what he can do. He feels like that combining that with his collaboration ability and adapting to fit what is needed in certain situations from economic development and or planning. He talked about, he had been to Decatur and felt like when he was there, it was a large community with a hometown feel, and he talked about how, the location along the river was a very good situation to be in from an economic development standpoint, as you're well aware. And he talked about being able to embrace that from a customer service standpoint. His background is primarily, obviously, economic development, and so that's been his concentration. He doesn't have as much experience on the building and inspection side, although he does work closely with those organizations where he is now. I kind of feel like he's the up-and-comer in the group, if you will, and so this would be a big step forward for him. He's very strong in grant writing, has done a lot of that, and also being able to take those grant funds and leverage them with other dollars within Henderson and Vance County. He very outgoing personality, I thought, very cordial, very easy to have just a simple conversation with about his experiences and his goals. Talk about being able to look at different challenges within complex projects. A couple of the ones he highlighted was a standard insurance company that when he was in Virginia, they were competing against bigger cities like Chattanooga and Atlanta and Lynchburg, and they were able to put a good incentive program together and attract that company to their town there in Alta Vista, and were able to provide numerous number of jobs for their community. He talked about from a management style of being, a team leader, being communication strong and making sure that staff understands the roles and what is happening. He talked about, creating an environment where everyone is a player and feels that they have a role to play in it. Going through weekly staff meetings and going over and and always setting the goals that they need to be striving for, and talking about how their purpose serves where that is in a goal that's being met. Talked about being able to sit with people and listen to them when we ask questions about, for instance, if you had an inspector who had interpreted a building code one way and the citizen or developer felt it was a different way, how would you address that situation? He talked about, sitting down and listening, and then, independently listening to staff to see if maybe they could find, if you will, a gray area in the code. But sometimes, as you said, there's just not a gray area, and so you have to go by the letter of the law if that's the issue. And so, not compromising rules, but be able to find possibly a common ground. From a budgeting standpoint, talked about keeping tight reins on the budget and staying within budget and making sure every dollar that we have is looked at and how it's best used. We talked about he has a strong background in GIS, and so from a technology standpoint, he would be a strong candidate in that regard. From he's implemented a couple of different programs within his work environment that's created some better technology uses. The other thing they've done in Henderson, obviously that area is a huge textile area, and a lot of those businesses are closed, and so they're going through a process of creating revitalization plans and how they can use some of those buildings that were old textile buildings and what they can attract new businesses to right now. He's also worked from a downtown development. They've got a Main Street group down there that they're doing a lot of mixed-use development in some of the old textile areas, and so he's got some experience in that regard as well. So his typically when we ask for references, what we try to get doesn't always work out, but what we try to get is either a former supervisor, so we can get a couple of different perspectives. And so his first reference was his former supervisor, so he was the town manager when he was in Alta Vista, and that was when he was the economic development director there. Talked about him being very detail-oriented, came in and just fully assessed and learned the community very quickly. It's a town that has a strong industrial base, so he was able to build some relationships with some of the business owners there. Talked about he was a go-getter and likes to gather facts and wants to be inclusive and wants to make sure responsibilities are well-rounded for his staff. Addressed conflict in a way that showed he understood and took things in stride. Talked about being comfortable talking with anyone from citizens to the CEO of a company. Was able to, when he made presentations, whether it was a zoning issue or a planning issue or an economic development issue, that he was able to, explain things to where everybody could understand them. Talked that he was a wonderful representative of the city. We also asked him 3 adjectives to describe, and he said he was energetic, knowledgeable, and trustworthy. And so his other reference that we received was a former colleague. He was this reference was the economic development director of the county when he was with the city of Alta Vista. So talked about the fact that Alta Vista is a big manufacturing and some robust industries, and they were able to work together. Talked about they'd lost a call center, and they were able to put together a package and bring him back. And with his help, and then talked about from the perspective of Main Street, he had a good experience with downtown development. So he was open and honest and shared issues and let other people share in the discussion of what the issue might be and how best to resolve it. Very outgoing, said he was very involved with a lot of civic organizations, very involved with Rotary, would meet with a lot of the small businesses and speak with them. Talked about it, had very good analytical skills. He looks at what needs to be done and what's the end goal, and then strategize as to how he could get to that. Said he was a very good presenter. He was calm and professional. Again, he was visible in the community. His 3 adjectives were that he was sincere, respectful, and had a genuine care for people. Any comments, any questions at this point?
None for me, Charles.
No, ma'am.
Ms. Hill?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Ard?
No.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, so moving on to candidate number 2, is Mr. Long. So, as you can see from the information, he has recently was released with a agreement from his previous employer. So he's currently unemployed at this time. Good background and really of the candidates in Tier 1 probably has the most extensive background from ED and from economic development and development, as well as from the planning side. His previous employment, the economic development was a part of the planning department, so he's had that experience. It's so kind of well-rounded. He has a lot of experience in South Carolina dealing with automotive from the Bridgestone. He was part of the Bridgestone Firestone building that was originally built there. It was an $800 million project that they brought into there. So it's one of the things that he talks about as a learning lesson, as well as being able to understand how to draw those larger employers and what they're looking for. Talking about from the standpoint of being a transformational leader, through his long career in different larger organizations, he's well versed in bringing in opportunities to the city, working as a business advocate. When I spoke with him, he'd done a lot of research on Decatur, had definitely read through the Decatur One Plan, or One Decatur Plan, and was well versed in that. Described his management style as a transformational leader, being able to set department goals and divisions and see how their individual work plans and putting together measurable goals with regard and making sure that they're working with stakeholders that might have an influence on some of those goals, being able to create opportunities for his staff to interact, and talked about being able to develop a culture where they're working toward a common goal. Obviously, in a department like yours there, you've got, inspectors going one way and developers or rather planners doing a different thing. And so he talked about being able to bring the different facets together. Even talked about from a standpoint of if some of the inspectors need to come to a planning and zoning meeting so they understand how that fits in, that would be something that he would certainly want to work toward. Again, also creating opportunities for his individual team members to become a better part of the team and to have decision-making processes. Talked about, from a standpoint of putting together new or revised building codes or planning and zoning codes. In the county he was recently in, they've done a lot of, Georgia's gone to a unified development code where it's all one code, and so they went through that process and had to rewrite the entire code for that. The other things they talked about was from a standpoint of when they're doing some of the redevelopment projects that they've done there, that some of the code just doesn't make sense because it was written back in the 1940s or 50s, because at that point they only have mixed use, and so that was part of that. So he's been through all of that and being able to work through that process and working with residents and the stakeholders within that to work that through a process. Again, he talked about whether it's some extra steps they need to take in order to have a conversation with the Planning Commission about how certain developments affect the community, what they look like and what they're going to look like, and have a strong plan put together. The other thing he talked about was knowing, what's in your toolbox of incentives, be able to offer to various companies, whether they're a small mom and pop business that's wanting to grow or a large, automotive industry that's looking to move into town or something. So one of the things they talked about was being able to put together a one-stop shop creation for them, and they were working toward that goal, and not quite achieved it yet, but they were certainly working toward that and being able to look at their processes to see if, over time, how they could have an impact on the process that people have to go through that process. His references, let's see. His first reference was his former supervisor when he was in Gainesville. Talked about him being the liaison to the Chamber of Commerce. Talked about the previous economic development director they had was kind of stagnant, so they hired him to be the go-getter. They became a partner in their urban development and retail. Felt like they made a cohesive team. He was innovative and had a can-do attitude, brought a lot of new ideas and worked with the city, built relationships really across the county, he said. Said he was soft-spoken, but a good listener. Had a good balance of being able to speak with the residents as well as elected officials or developers. Very enthusiastic about new ideas. Always kept his team working and feeling like they were a part of it. He was not one of those kind of in-your-face when it came to conflict. He would be more of be able to navigate in a calm direction. Talks about him being innovative and engaging others and thinks things through. Very, again, soft-spoken but clear and effective. Talked about him being competent and confident as well. Being able to, very sociable. His adjectives were competent, innovative in his approach to economic development, and reliable. And then his other reference, they worked together in Forsyth at the Chamber. They were colleagues together at the Chamber. Talked about him having a lot of positive effects, being able to do work with a lot of the international companies that were relocating there. Felt like that he was a go-getter in bringing business to the county. A very good personality, professional, good working relationship with his supervisors. And if they disagreed, he knew to follow their direction. He gave direction and would give some leeway in their jobs and not be a micromanager. He would set their expectations and explain exactly what was needed. And if he needed to, he'd take them under their wing and help them if they needed some redirection. Talk to him as if he was almost like an engineer with his analytical mind. Looks at the facts and numbers, not the emotions part of it. Clear and to the point when he speaks and gives presentations, but keeps control of the room. The face of economic development for the county. Talks about from adjective perspective being knowledgeable, respectful, and had an amazing personality. Any questions about Mr. Long?
None for me. Mr. Kirby?
No, ma'am.
Mrs. Hill?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Ard?
No, ma'am.
All right, Sarah.
Okay. So moving on to the third candidate, Mr. Nagy. So from a perspective of, while his resume may not appear that he's qualified, you have to look at it from our perspective of having been a city manager in a small town. You become the economic development person and a lot of times the planning director, especially if you're in a town that's growing. And so he has served as city administrator, city manager in smaller towns, and like I said, often function as the economic development person for that. Has had a background as a building inspector originally, and so he's worked at, obviously worked as director in Atlanta, which is a very large municipality, without that being said. And so if you're familiar with the Buckhead part of Atlanta, he has an instrumental role in that area as well. tried to talk about being able to see employees' point of view and understanding their perspective, and really looking for a teamwork and being a good liaison to between him and whoever his supervisor is and his support team. Always looking through and at the big picture was really a lot of the things that he talked about during our time together. Talking about, obviously working through that Buckhead project in Atlanta from a perspective of not just how nice it is now, but when it originally started, and a lot of the coordination for the right-of-way and the streets, and being able to, being instrumental in coordinating all that and having a successful project, even one that came in under budget and was full of different types of construction. So he talked about that from a perspective, really gained a lot of knowledge about how things can move forward within an organization and how communication is key. And he kind of led that in, as he said, to talking about how that's changed a little bit of his management style, is trying to be more communicative to his employees within the department, so they have a bigger picture understanding of what's happening, not just in what they do every day, but how that fills in with what the rest of the department is doing. Talked about, being, having a sense of progress and being able to see, if there's some goals that have been given to employees, or there's a particular project that has different measurable steps to it, to be able to show those and have some timelines available to where the employees can see that, and making sure taking care of his staff. He says is the most important thing, and he wants to inspire people to be their best. And so being able to come in and gain their trust and do that through, visioning or helping them see how they fit into the broader picture of the community is important to him. Talked about a couple of situations where they'd not really had a lot of tall story buildings, and so it was kind of how to deal with that and dealing with the citizens on one side who didn't want the taller buildings, and being able to really just have that free exchange of information. And once they realized that they weren't so far apart, were able to work together on a plan to deal with that large structure, as well as some of the improvements they were wanting to make on the inside, was a little bit beyond what their current ordinances did. So again, was able to rewrite some of their ordinances to where that reflected more about how the workforce and workplaces are in today's times versus what they were years ago when the original ordinances were written. So that was a big thing for him, was always keeping up to date on ordinances and driving on redoing them and how they fit into, he talked about doing some master plan and how they fit into those ordinances, how the ordinances fit into those, and they have to match all the way around, because it doesn't do you any good to rewrite them if we haven't determined what direction we want the community to go and what are those goals to be set. Talked about had experience with Porsche and their R&D facility there, and was able to help them through some of those planning processes in the industrial park. So has had a wide variety of experience in different types of developments, and has done a lot of different deals, he said, as a person trying to attract development. Again, he talked about from a one-stop shop place, as being able to always look at that goal and trying to determine how much easier we can make it for people coming in, whether it's just a resident that needs a fence permit or a developer that's building a 20-story building, and to make sure that everyone's accessible and that people can get their questions answered, and being able to provide experience that way. Unfortunately, we were only able to get one of his references, and that reference was his former supervisor when he worked in Atlanta. So he was the Commissioner of Planning and Development, which is who Mr. Nagy reported to. Talked about him being instrumental in getting developers to stay on time and organized with inspections. He talked about he juggled a lot of development. He had a lot of great stuff and had a great staff as well and was able to keep them working together. Talked about being very firm, respectful, and cordial. He's not a dictator. He listened to his staff and took the recommendations into consideration before he made the final decision. Knew a lot about how to put incentive programs together when they were needed, or encouraged others to, even for his employees, encourage his employees to continue their education and get their certificates if they needed them for certain types of inspections. Always a follow through on directions that were given to him. He didn't waste a lot of time when he brought him an assignment. He took it head on and went straight for it. Talked about he had good written skills, very professional, a good PR person for the department. Talked about him being a problem solver. He knew that if reference had an issue, Mr. Nagy could get it done. Talked about him being, from adjective perspective, being energetic, accommodating, and respectful. Any questions there?
No, ma'am, none from me. Mr. Kirby?
I do have one. Powder Springs, Georgia. Is that up between Atlanta and Chattanooga?
Charles, this is Chuck. Powder Springs is west of Atlanta. It's part of Cobb County. I used to live very close there.
All right, that helps. Thank you.
Ms. Hill?
No, ma'am.
Mr. R?
Yes, I do.
Alrighty.
Sarah, in his questions, on the question of have you been asked to resign, he said, yes, I will discuss in person or on the phone. Could you fill in?
Yes, sir. So when he was in, you can see in his work history, he had a very strong stint in Fort Morgan, Colorado. And
Yes.
they had a change of administration, and not unlike other city managers, sometimes when that happens, they are asked to resign. And he was asked to resign with severance, and so it was very amiable. It was just that the new mayor coming in wanted a different administrator.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, sir, next.
Okay. Moving on to Mr. Poole. Mr. Poole was most recently in Rock Island, and if you know anything about Illinois politics, Rock Island is a city that's had a lot of ups and downs, and so when the mayor left there, the new mayor came in, they made a lot of changes, and so unfortunately he was caught up in some of those changes. But I think he's still a strong candidate. Talking with him, very nice, warming personality. His last role in Rock Island pretty much mirrors the same size staff that you have there in Decatur. They had GIS, planning, zoning, inspections. All of it was a part of his department there, and so he's managed something very similar to what you have in Decatur. He talked about, again, really talked about teamwork and making sure others understood what was going on within the other departments. It's so easy. He talked about being able to get lost in that when people are doing different things and their roles are totally different than one another. You know, somebody in GIS is certainly not going to be going out and inspecting things. And talked about his role is bringing that team together and working to bring them in line and working to make things go forward. Talked about his experience with grant writing. He had a lot of experience there in his past, and also about his experience even when he was in West Lafayette, which is where Purdue University is, and a lot of the work that they did with the university then, even to the extent where they went to the university annexed in a lot of property that was owned by the university and worked with them in creating some TIFs and was able to, Rolls-Royce has their big jet engine plant there, and so they were able to continue to help that company grow, and had some creative ideas about how they were able to keep them there as well as attract other ones through either incentives or through their TIF programs, and eventually was able to have the entire university's property annexed into the city, which created a big difference within West Lafayette. Talked about when he went into Rock Island. Obviously, Illinois is a big union state, and the employees there were unionized, so that was something different that he had to work through. But he felt like that through, speaking with them and getting to know them, that they understood that, he was certainly not there to bust up a union or anything, but was able to, just sit down and, as he said, not come in swinging with the hammer, but to learn what their jobs were, and even went out into the field with them so he could gain their trust, and, had their yearly reviews with them, and everything was great within the department, and making sure that they also engaged with other departments. And so he was also talked about being able to work across departmental lines, whether it's on a development or an issue they're having with a resident that may be having issues that stretches across a couple of different departments, but being able to make sure that they're user-friendly within the organization and that their teams are engaging, and making sure that they understand that the customer, the residents, are the most important, and that's who they need to make sure that they get information to or answer their questions, whichever the case may be. Talked about before he went into the public sector, had a real estate license in commercial and did a lot of real estate in commercial settings, so has that background experience, with also, helps him to attract or understand what companies might be looking for when it comes to certain types of real estate deals. And so he's got, that kind of well-rounded experience. They have recently gone through, if you know anything about the building codes, in 2017, the new sprinkler system codes went into effect if you've adopted the 2017 building code. And so they just recently did that, and talked about knew that it would be consensus from the beginning, and so was able to have a lot of meetings. Had some bad press originally, but then was able to have a lot of meetings with developers, and had specific meetings with the Board of Realtors, so they understand. And I think that he, initially came down to a lot of people had thought the code was a certain way, and in reality it was a little bit different than what they realized. So it was really just a matter of making sure, obviously, structures are occupied and safe, but for them to understand. And I thought important that he chose to go to people like the Board of Realtors, who are the ones out there that are probably going to be talking about these new codes. And so basically he just through that type of revision and has done that type of experience. And so they did a complete rewrite of their planning and zoning code, updating it because they also have a rental inspection program there, and so they needed to update some of those regulations as well. And so, through his team, he said that they were able to put together a good new rewrite of the code, and took their time doing it and didn't just kind of jump into some of those conclusions. Had a large business park in West Lafayette that they were able to put 12 buildings in, and brought somewhere close to 3,000 jobs into the community. So had a lot of experience in those larger developments as well. I thought very well-rounded experience. One of the things they did when he was in Rock Island was they were one-stop shop there, and not only that, but they were able to, they became the poster child, if you will. A lot of the cities were coming to them to understand the processes that they went to. And he talked about it they didn't actually put in a project management system in place, but used that style to process, and so that they knew what deadlines were upcoming, whether it was, plumbing inspections have to be done by a certain date or so on and so forth, and that way they have even a big wall, he said, that they keep up, and so that everybody understands where things are, and if somebody has a question about it, they can easily just kind of look at the wall and see where things are in that process. His references, his first reference was they worked together they were colleagues when he was in Rock Island. Talked about him having a can-do attitude and a unique approach to looking at the scope of things, not always incorporated the entire staff to do likewise. Utmost respectful and professional manner, was not a micromanager, very, very involved when they needed to be, but otherwise just give direction and expect his employees to follow through. Strong personality. Talked about with their growing community, they were doing a lot of stuff on the outside, and he was very involved in that. Likes to hear both sides and then stay neutral while he's looking for a solution. Not afraid to make the hard call, however he does. Want people to understand why the decision was made the way it was. Very detail-oriented, down to the last penny. Uses a lot of statistics, and he's very strong in that area. Good communicator, always makes good eye contact. Said he was honest, full of integrity, always does the right thing even when the right thing is the hard thing to do. Always out and about in the community, looking for ways to improve the community, checking on businesses, dealing with resident issues. Talks about from his adjectives being professional, humble, and jovial. And then his other reference was a colleague when he was in West Lafayette. Talked about him being collaborative, inclusive, being a strong leader, open to new ideas, always keeps the goals in mind, but very much a self-starter. Has an innate ability to understand where different people are coming from and allows them to relate well to them. Very successful in his communication, strong leadership. Says he empowers and supports his team, and therefore they feel heard and supported. Always open to hearing both sides, works quickly to resolve issues. Smart, quick with numbers, can easily break down things on any level if needed. Good with the media, handles himself well in the media, an advocate for the city, cares about the organization, immerses himself into the community. His adjectives were innovative, collaborative, and strategic. Any questions about Mr. Poole?
No, ma'am. Mr. Kirby?
No, ma'am.
Ms. Hill?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Ard?
No.
All righty, sir.
All right. So moving on to Miss Singh. If you're like me, if you're wondering how to pronounce her first name, it's Rin.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Rin T.
Okay.
Rin T. Singh.
Yes, ma'am.
So I thought Ms. Singh had a great balance of public and private experience. We see a lot of municipalities now that want someone, especially in this type of position, to maybe have both public and private experience. Obviously, she was on the public side and has gone to the private side. Would like to be back into the public side. She is a planner by trade. Obviously, she is an AICP member. Talked about that, being able to create strong working relationships, working together for a common goal. She's written a lot of code, obviously in her role with the County Planning Commission. She primarily, if you have seen some of the neighborhood markets, that's been her focus at her current position. And so she's got that experience from being able to look at it from both sides. I felt like, and she even indicated that's why she was chosen for her current role, is because she does work with a lot of municipalities in designing their current neighborhood markets that they have. She talked about, working quickly to establish trust with not just the council or with committees or with people from the outside of the organization, but also with her team, being able to, work strongly together and making sure that, the other thing she talked about was really making sure things such as when they're rewriting documents or that they're redoing code is, the things she learned when she was at the county was being very open and having lots of meetings with residents. If there was a lot of change coming up, they'd gone through a complete rewrite there, and so they wanted to make sure that people understood. And even if it takes a little bit longer to get it passed, she felt like it was worth it in the end to be able to make sure everyone understood and we're working from the same fact base, and that the residents would fully understand what that code would look like moving forward. Talked about being a collaborative leader, working together, making her team feel like that they're empowered, and being able to work closely with them and plan with them. And she even talked about from a perspective of succession plan was very important to her, from making sure that her team, if she left the team, that there was somebody that was there to step in who could take on those same challenges as she could. One of the things she talked about was really strong, and obviously with the projects they have there and what she's doing, bringing those project management skills. She even sent me a couple of the spreadsheets that she used for project management to show how they go through a process of seeing where things are and what are the deliverables and who's responsible for it, and how those things can keep moving, how the task can keep moving forward. Talking about they keep a tracking sheet on their wall for the project that she has going on, and that would continue to be her intent to do that through that process, is making sure that people understand within the organization if somebody calls in that may not be on that project, that perhaps they can be able to answer a question about where it is just based upon the tracking sheet that they have. Talk about building strong relationships with the residents and encouraging them to be a part of any of the processes that they have going on, whether that's through rewriting code or serving on committees to help them understand. Talk about being able to obviously in her situation that she's in now, she can talk the language with the municipalities that she's dealing with, and being able to work through whatever solutions they're looking for or to meet their requirements, and understanding what their requirements are. And the other thing talked about, when there is a difference, is being able to sit down and talk through what is the issue, how can we address the issue, and what would that look like moving forward if we took a certain direction within that. Also talked about her experience in Canada. Windsor is the international gateway for a lot of industrial plants, including the big Chrysler plant that's there, and so has had that experience in working with large developers as well as industrial areas. And then talked about, when she was in Benton County, that they were doing, some smaller developments, some strip centers, and so she's had, a wide exposure to that activity as well. Talked about when she was in Benton County, a lot of the residents there, think the word zoning is really a bad word, and so, something simple that they did is started calling it a land use map instead of zoning, and just that little thing that made people forget the zoning word and were able to transform their thoughts in a different way. And so that was interesting how she tried to do that and understand it from their perspective, and being able to get their buy-in. Talked about making sure that communication is always key to everything, and through that, whether it's, communicating up or communicating down or communicating across, through department heads, and making sure that, there's no surprises, everybody understands, what's there, and creating consistency, creating, even to the point of, creating some formal documents, when needed, if that means just having professional standards that they can go in and use, or whatever the case may be, but just making sure everything's communicated and that it's understood. Her references were, and unfortunately I only have one reference for her as well. Reference is her current, her former supervisor when she first started at her current position. Talked about that she helped, when he came in, she had already been there, and so she helped him learn a lot and made sure that he understood what was happening and was very communicative to him. Excellent with her supervisors, very respectful and understood their needs and strategies. She's very passionate and relatable, engaging, always looking at the needs of her subordinates as well, and while keeping them going through whatever situations that they're going through and working through issues that they may be having. Talked about that she was always one to take on any challenges that were given, a very good, very strong self-starter, always handled any conflict well, was organic, called her an organic problem solver. Says she, very good communicator, discusses anything that she might have, whether it's a new initiatives, very seamlessly with everyone on the team. Skill set, felt that her skill set with municipalities, and to be very passionate, caring, and persuasive. Any questions about Ms. Singh?
None for me. Mr. Kirby?
Sarah, looking at the certifications, it looks like for our purposes, we would consider this candidate as being a certified city planner?
Correct,
Thank you.
Ms. Hill?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Arnold?
No.
All right, Sarah. Thank you.
All right. On to Mr. Watson. All right. So, with having actually lived not too far from Benton Harbor, I know a little bit about the area, and even though it looks like his background is a little bit different direction, I was really impressed with the amount of real estate knowledge. And you have to understand Benton Harbor is the home of the Whirlpool, but they went through such a decline, and they kind of lost their direction, and they lost population. Whirlpool no longer manufactures there. They're technically their world headquarters are still there, but so Benton Harbor through this whole process of realigning what should be their goal, and so fortunately they were able to attract a Jack Nicklaus golf course development there that's very popular, and it's really just completely changed the face of Benton Harbor. They're now really more tourism based. They do have a really strong arts area. They've started to see their downtown regrow. The typical things you see going into a lot of redevelopment in downtowns, like microbreweries and mom and pop shops and those types of things. And so they've really had to readjust everything that they've been thinking about and how that works together for them. And then from a perspective of, again, redoing their ordinances, because now they're repurposing buildings that could be art districts instead of manufacturing, and they were zone manufacturing. And so over the few years or several years that he's worked there, he's seen all this and been a part of all of that. And so the other thing is to understand about Benton Harbor, it was so depressed and was not professionally managed in some regards, and they went into financial receivership by the state. And so from 2011 to 2014, they were under receivership by the state, and then finally in 2016 they were able to work their way out of that. And so with that has been this economic development surge that Mr. Watson has been a part of. So, very structured and engaging when we had a conversation. He brought that city through that financial hardship, and I point that out not because from a financial standpoint, but because of what the city had to do in order to get it out of that role. And a lot of that was, how was it going to attract people to come to the area, spend money in the area, the things related to economic development and planning is a lot of what he's done in that area. And then with that came a big resurgence of residential development that came along with the area. So they had a huge uptick on both sides. And then also through that, his experience in public works, I think is also beneficial from a standpoint of understanding what developments need in order to grow their companies, and what from a utility standpoint, a right-of-way or building, that type of thing. So I think a little bit different experience, but I think one that fits well with what you're looking for. And so talked about his management style being one of inclusion, looking for people who have a strong skill sets and being able to determine, do they need to be mentored, or are they strong in that skill set, or do they need improvements in other skill sets? Being able to talk about not micromanaging them unless he sees the need to, but being able to just advise and let them do their jobs. Talked about building better relationships, educating when needed. Talked about we should be planning for today, tomorrow, and the future, and setting goals and benchmarks along the way. One thing he talked about that he likes to do with his weekly staff meetings is, let's talk about where we are strategically. If they have a strategic plan, and where are they in that process of meeting some of those strategic goals, whether that's, just a weekly process or they do it monthly, but being able to hold them accountable and to their deadlines was the intent of that, so that everybody sees the same goal that's moving forward and how they're going to get to that goal through strategic planning. Talked about, empowering his staff to have the latitude to make decisions if needed out in the field. And if they weren't comfortable with that decision, that was okay. They could come back and they could talk about what the issue was, if it was, a set of guidelines that were unsure about, or if it was necessary just to, in a certain situation, follow the letter of the law. But to be able to look at it from every angle, and when those gray areas arise, to work through them with the staff, but always coming with a united front with whatever decision that was made by staff. So we want to make sure that they got their input, and then everybody was heard, and then a decision was made. Again, they've gone through, in 2012, they went through a complete rewrite of their zoning ordinance, and a new master plan for the entire community based upon all the growth that's taking place there now. Even to the extent from the one-stop shop process is, so Benton Harbor is the largest town in a county that has a ton of tiny, small towns in it. And so some of those towns don't even have full-time staff on it. And so they talked about it from the county's perspective of helping out some of those smaller municipalities when they do need, an inspection or a plan review. And so they've been working through that with the area mayors and council members there as well. again, talked about the fact of the change that they went through from, you know, the 1990s when they were heavy and Whirlpool was strong, and then now they have a lot of bigger issue is the value of the land is not kept pace in the downtown area, and so the downtown area has actually risen in price, I should say, and the rest of the town has not kept up with that. And so from an EAD perspective, they're still, you know, struggling financially in some regards. And so they talked about, again, bringing in those new ideas of the art district and some of the manufacturing areas, and creating some other opportunities for people to be able to work in that area. Talked about being able to bring people together and create positive solutions, being able to look at stakeholders to see, you know, are there some things that they're wanting versus something that we want to do. You talked an instance where there was a downtown business that they were able to help with some assistance because they were going to do some construction and put in some new traffic lights, and so but just being able to kind of think outside the box sometimes and create some creative solutions to problems if there are any. So his references, his first reference is his current supervisor at the real estate. Also, give you another insight, the current real estate group that he works for is the real estate group that's bought up most of the properties in their downtown area and some of their manufacturing facilities on the outskirts. And so he works with them to work through the processes that the city will have them working through, because he's been on the other side of it, if you will. And so that's what he's doing for that real estate group. So his boss there, you know, has known him for 20 years because they've owned property in town, and they've worked with him when he was the public works director and when he was the city manager there as well. He talked about him, he's been a single beacon of light for Benton Harbor, really good in a number of areas, calm, analytical, knows the numbers, wears the political storms, gets things done with little funding and little cooperation sometimes. He sees the big picture of economic development and is involved in some of the leadership programs. If anyone can move the city forward, it's him. He talks about working well with the developers and being a critical thinker. He's talked about even, you know, in meetings, if he's been attacked or, you know, it's been a tough one, he stays cool and calm and is always very respectful. Never a micromanager. He gives the team the tools, answers the questions, does not hover over them, he expects them to do their job, and asks for help if needed. He said he's a big guy with a lot of charm, loves to talk, will defend his staff, to get to know them on a personal level. Talked about never looking for a fight, but to, you know, let things be cool and calm and collected, very patient, does a lot of research if he needs to find information, great with numbers. Talked about always seen in public, knows how to handle the mediator, excellent communicator, problem with groups or with technical communication. Obviously loves the community, is out and about a lot. Talks about excellent institutional knowledge, good at infrastructure work, as well as understands the role and the purpose of government and sees the priorities there. From adjectives, says he was a force of nature, charming, calm, a bridge builder, and gets things done. His other one is a former subordinate who worked with him. He was the, she was the assistant director under him when he was the city manager. She was the economic development director. Talked about him being integral in introducing new technology to the city. Also very knowledgeable and kind of tries to stay ahead of some of the trends from a technology standpoint. Approachable, very resourceful for the elected officials. He has high warmth and high expectations for his staff. He has an open door. They could go with him with his concerns. Has a team, encouraged a team mentality. Always aware of the issues and was there to help if needed. Very cool under pressure. Talked about, some of the complexities within municipal government, but he always maintained composure and professionalism. Always planning, looking at the best way to approach a situation, would consult with others and not make a snap decision. Always had a good plan of attack. Very open communicator, understood the partners that needed to be in the room. Knowledgeable, approachable, truly cares about the community, is a diligent worker, a multitasker, said from an adjective that he was resilient, resourceful, and introspective. Questions?
None for me. Mr. Kirby?
Sarah, on all these candidates, was it clear to them if they were selected that residency here would be required?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I have some other questions, which I don't mind sending by email, but I would like all the candidates to answer them. They're rather short, easy questions.
I understand him.
I'm sorry, Christy, what did you say?
I couldn't understand what Charles said, the last sentence.
He has some questions that he will email Sarah. Christy, did you get that one?
I did get it, but I also get an echo in the background.
Okay. Does anybody need to turn on mute? Is that what we need to do? Guys, if you're listening, please put on your mute. Thank you. Mr. Jackson, any questions? Ms. Hill, any questions?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Ard?
No.
Okay, I think that, okay. Sarah, can we do something right quick? I'm not sure how long you can be on the line. We do have a meeting scheduled at 5. We're already 11 minutes behind on that. Do you mind calling us back, or are you going to need to go through this right now?
No, I can do whatever's good for you.
Okay, if you will let us have this meeting, and we will, Rochelle, can you stay on the line with her or let her know once we are finished with this meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Uh-huh.
And Rochelle.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Let's take a moment. Are these, we can pass those out? Okay, does everyone else have theirs?
We'll stop this train and get started for the next meeting.
We got to have them call it.
For the meeting now?
Yeah. Or do you just
Just
want to
keep
continue?
going, that's fine.
Well, I'd rather just stop it and start.
That's fine,
Because
whatever.
They're not gonna see the label, this was labeled directly.
That's fine.
You guys, as far
Whatever's
as
convenient for y'all guys.
goes, I have to hang this up because it's a different meeting.
On this,
Thanks.
on this
So
one.
I'm gonna, you
Well,
got
at the work
the
session, it
invite
doesn't
from
matter,
Lamar
because we're not
Rath.
voting, so.
Thank you. Call him back.